A dad of two, serial road tripper, lover of music, player of guitars, reader of books, nature adventurer, yogi, and enjoyer of Indian food, Alex Searle is a storyteller who helps others tell their story. He is also the founder of Humble Mind. Today, we hear the story behind the storyteller.
Thank you so much, Alex Searle, for joining us here on AwareNow to share this time, this space, and your story. Thank you so much.
Wonderful to be here. I'm very humbled that you asked me. I'm not quite sure why you asked me, but I'm here. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
I'm glad that you're here. Let's start with the story of Alex Searle. From the beginning to now, please share, if you were to draft a summary of your life, how would it read?
Wow. Well, it would probably have unexpected adventure in there somewhere in the ChatGPT summary. But yeah, I was born in South Africa. My mum is originally from Spain. My dad had some European heritage as well, but South African mainly. I'm an only child. My parents are musicians. They still play music. They've been playing that together as part of a band, a really good band, for 40 years. And so kind of being creative and being on an adventure and being around people has always been part of the DNA from day one for me. And so I traveled a lot with them as a kid. I used to go with them to when they used to go for work, for music, for their kind of creative arts. I used to go with them and go to school in different places. Went to school in Egypt, in Spain, lived in Qatar for a little while. All of that before I was about 12 or 13. And then it kind of was inevitable in a way that I would also follow music. So music is also a massive passion of mine. And all throughout, I suppose until I was about 25, I was a sort of a serious musician, if you want to call it that, with big quotation marks hanging in the air. And it was part of bands and music and really loved the creative process of making music. But I also felt that there was something kind of missing from only being in a band or only playing music, even though it's a beautiful, creative, spiritual path. I don't think it was my only path. And so I also found out a little bit later that I had entrepreneurial skills and I had different kinds of, business skills and relationship skills that I found myself wanting to cultivate in some direction. And so, what started then ended up being 4 different businesses that I've started since then. Now I live in Spain. I've got 2 kids, 7 and 4, and 1 on the way. Lots of kids, lots of fun. In 5 days, I'm turning 33, so pretty busy, I suppose. Keeping life interesting. And life continues. It's certainly a fun existence, and I also have learned over the last couple of years that the more I trust my own curiosity and kind of go with it and go with my gut on what interests me, the easier things come. The easier things seem to kind of come and gravitate opportunities towards me instead of trying to chase them, trying to push them. I don't know if that's a complete answer, but
I think that's a fabulous summary. And I love how the way you ended that summation to say that it's learning to trust your curiosity. So many people say, well, trust your instinct, trust what you know to be true, but you trusting what you're not sure to be true, but curious to figure it out. So that's awesome.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So, and we talked previous about storytelling. So I feel that the art of storytelling is contingent on the science of the story asking. So my question for you now is, as a professional interviewer, which you are, one of your many hats that you wear, what most inspires you about the craft of the interview?
It's actually a recent sort of discovery, if anything, because I've always loved stories and hearing great storytellers, and obviously as we all do. But I've also found that what also has attracted me to podcasting and listening to podcasts, enjoying the process of also creating podcasts, even though I'm still kind of figuring my way out on that, is this conversation element. The fact that there's not something being told from one voice, but rather you're listening in, you're the fly on the wall, into a conversation that's unfolding between two people, and the exchange of energy instead of the one direction of energy is just so much more interesting and so much more kind of live and extemporaneous. It's sort of happening before your eyes. It's almost like watching a high-speed video of a construction site. It's kind of it's taking place in front of you, rather than something that's kind of learned and just repeated. So there's something really special about that, and also it's the kind of thing that I think brings out truth much more easily. Because when you're storytelling, or when you're prepared something and now you're going to go and deliver a speech or whatever it might be, you know what you're doing, right? Start to finish, you know the message, and it's going to be a sort of a one-way street, and obviously there's value to that. But in that conversation or element or interview situation, you don't really know how things will come out, which means normally when they come out the first time, you're going to have an interesting answer, and people are less prepared to shield what might be a lie or what might not be the way they want it to come out. It's just going to come out, especially if the questions are good and if they're incisive. So there's a real art in not only interviewing, but also being interviewed, because it just gives you all of these wonderful things. And story asking is a nice way to think of it too, because it relies on a back and forth, a kind of a question and answer to create meaning together. So I love it. I love listening to interviews. I love listening to podcasts. And I also like just doing it. I'm certainly not a professional interviewer. I kind of fell with my ass in it, as I did with a lot of things, and then just ended up following my curiosity and seeing what happened. Yeah, it's an amazing medium for sure. Yeah, very revealing one too.
Yeah, I completely agree. And to your point that it's dialogue, because I think in society we're so used to monologues or dialogues that are so rigid and so like predefined as to what message should be scripted, as opposed to one that just sort of flows and,
exactly,
to your point, like sort of reveals itself in real time. So let's talk questions. If there was one universal question, one thing that you could ask that would best tell the tale of a person, what would that be? There are so many questions to be asked. If you had just one, there's a complete stranger standing in front of you. You can ask them one question to know them.
That's an interesting question. Maybe I would ask this one. I suppose it's always going to be dependent on what you want to know, because that's probably worth mentioning as well. As an interviewer, or when you're conducting a conversation or a discussion of some kind, you're asking questions, but you're also not doing it blindly. You're kind of going somewhere with it, and you're sort of testing hypothesis. Maybe you're thinking about a problem and asking for comments. So there's different types of questions, different things that you can find out by asking different questions. I don't know if there's like a single boom kind of like, kind of question that you can just throw out and then you're going to get everything you need to know. That's the beauty of having different kinds of questions. Ones that are softer, ones that are harder, ones that are more detailed, ones that are more open. But to give you a partial answer, I think it's nice to ask people about a very small, specific thing. And what I mean by that is, instead of trying to, and this is something I'm actually trying to still learn and get better at, but often in conversations with people, if you're going too big and too broad and too general and too what's the universe all about, then chances are it's such an impossible expectation. It's really hard to kind of come up with anything meaningful or entertaining. It's such a big question. But if you go in small, like, tell me about your favorite place in the world and why you like it, or when was the last time a piece of music made you cry, or I don't know, something like that, where it's sort of specific and kind of takes you right down to a moment. The chances are that someone's going to be able to relate to that much more quickly and much more personally, so that then they can describe what it felt like, the colors, the sounds at the time, who they were with, all of these things, and you get a better story that you're asking of them, back to story asking, rather than something that's too large. Finding the general in the specific, I think is way more interesting than asking everyone to be a philosopher. In fact, that's the way to be a philosopher.
I quite agree. Yeah, as opposed to the big question, it's the right question.
Sometimes big questions are too big. They're too big for their own good, and so you find more interesting things by taking a detour or taking a road a little bit less traveled, and then you find something more interesting. Yeah,
absolutely. So storytelling then is really all about learning, interacting in hopes of thriving in this life, in this world. Here enters Humble Mind. Please tell us about this platform that you founded and the community that you're leading to prepare humanity for the future of work.
Wow. So, I just love the word humble. It's an interesting word. I like also the way that it looks. I'm a bit of a word nerd, and sometimes it's not just about the meaning of a word, but the way it looks or the way it sounds actually affects how you form an attachment to it. And I just like the word, the way it looks and the way it sounds. Obviously, I like how it's defined as well. For me, being humble it's kind of like having an open heart while also keeping an open mind. It's being about sort of present in a small role that you might play in a big world, but a big influence that you can have in a small way as well. So it's kind of, relates to quite a few different pieces. And Humble Mind, the community I'm building, is a place for entrepreneurs, curious sort of digital professionals, mentors, even creative freelancers, and founders, small business owners, people who often I find need support and need a source of learning, but don't really have the right space for that, the right container for that. But there's a community there that goes wide, but also goes deep. So every week there's a kind of a weekly format where we have a different topic. We get some featured speakers that come in, and it's all online. And for sort of 60 to 90 minutes, that's your space, that's your container, where you can learn about intuition, about enlightened leadership, about the world of AI and navigating the truth in AI, how to start a podcast, how to build a business, how to grow internationally, all of these different topics. Sometimes it's a knowledge deep dive, sometimes it's a skills exchange, it's different kinds of things. But the idea is to kind of, go wide so that you're exposed to different kinds of opinions and perspectives and speakers, maybe sometimes even those you might not agree with, but also to go deep, to invite your own curiosity. And that's why there's a very active kind of facilitation element to these as well. So it's not just about sitting on a webinar and being on mute, but I will always kind of engage and get everyone on the session to get involved. What do you think? What's your opinion? Share your perspective. Tell us, because it doesn't matter if you're an expert or not. That is, it doesn't matter at all. It's about what your perspective is, and something in your wording, something in your answer, something in your experience might come out, and someone else goes, wow, I resonate with that, or I don't agree at all with that, and here's why. And so you get this kind of beautiful organic conversation that starts to emerge. And when that happens, when people begin to talk to each other, which is the real formation of a community, not just a one to many, but a network effect of everyone else interacting, then you begin to get these beautiful bonds that start to emerge between people that otherwise would just have been strangers. And that's actually starting to happen on this platform. And so it's learning, it's skills development, it's connection, and it's curious inquiry, all rolled in one big fat sandwich. So yeah, that's Humble Mind, and it's still growing. It's still pretty early. I started it this year, but I'm really proud and really happy of where it's going. And yeah, sky's the limit.
That sounds amazing. I love that word that was used earlier, that curiosity, an invitation to be and to stay curious.
What I've found in this is that things like curiosity, intuition, big words, empathy, because I've really kind of tried to sit with it and think about what do those mean? And I don't have an answer for it, but I've realized, at least the start of it, is that they're actually skills. They're actually things that you can do. You can do something with them. It's not just this beautiful big cloud that hangs in the air and you're kind of like curiosity, intuition, these sort of like big sort of words that mean nothing and everything at the same time. But the group element and what we do as Humble Mind, as a collective, as a group, is to open up these things and to talk about them and kind of create knowledge around them. And I found that something like curiosity is really a skill. It's like a muscle that you go to the gym and you work out. And the better you are at spotting it, noticing it, presenting, having space for it, the better it can serve you. And so, like I said, if you start to follow it and notice it a little bit more often and make a habit of that, then you find that curiosity actually brings opportunities, and it makes you more open and supple to learn new things. And these are the same for all of these other things as well. Being humble, that's a set of skills. It's a thing that you can do, not a thing to be performed and a thing to live outside of your integrity. Of course not. But you have to learn how to do that, or to be that, or to be better at it. And that's kind of a big central kind of thing that we're exploring in Humble Mind.
It's really awesome. So what also is awesome is poetry. So let's end our conversation today on a bit of a poetic note. There's this poem I'm very fond of. Maud Muller is the title. It's penned by John Greenleaf Whittier. And he says this: For all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these: it might have been. So, my question for you, for those who hesitate with telling their story that might be told but has not been told yet, what is your advice?
Sure.
Easy
Give me the big
today.
questions here, Ali. Yeah.
Just easy question for you.
Love it. It's a beautiful piece. I don't know that piece, and I love poetry. So and it's so true, isn't it? It might have been living a life of regrets or missed chances or missed opportunities. I think one of the things that people convince themselves of too often, and this is what stops them before they start, is that they think that there could never be an audience that would be interested in listening, and that kind of convinces them that their story is not worth telling or hearing. But obviously that's not the case, firstly, because we live in such a massively diverse world that there's an audience for everything and everybody. There really is, right? Every subcategory, every niche, every ridiculous fetish, it's there. And so if you've got something to share or to say, no matter how ridiculous you might think it is, chances are somewhere there will be some kind of audience for it. Now, of course, this may change depending on if you're doing this as a business or if you have a story to share, of a personal nature, or if you're being artistic. I suppose different ways to look at that. But yeah, ultimately it's getting rid of that belief that it's something that is either too niche or too small or too personal or too ridiculous or too emotional or whatever it might be to not share. Because chances are, if something's touched you, then there's a really strong chance that someone else will benefit from that message. So that's maybe a philosophical piece of advice. Maybe a more practical one is really to find a way to practice. It sounds funny, but how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right? And the way to develop any great habit, great ability, any skill as well, is by doing it repeatedly and continuously trying to make progress on that. Great poets, great writers, great musicians, they spend decades doing that. They're not just great from the get-go. And it's exactly the same with a craft like storytelling. You've got to get better at it. When I first started interviewing and speaking to people and hosting people on Humble Mind like I do, I sucked at it. And I think I don't really like the way I do it now anyway. But the point is that you learn, you see what you do, you get better, you put that in and you try again and you get better. And that's the messy part. That's the messy, ugly part that no one likes, but is so essential. It just has to happen, and with that comes a confidence as well, a confidence in your voice. And a voice is central to telling a story, because you have a story and then you have the storyteller. And sometimes we're more intrigued by the storyteller than we are with the story. And that's fine. That's part of the package. That's part of the experience. So yeah, I suppose the first is to get rid of the false belief that there might not be an audience for it, because there always is.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly is to practice, is to get good at it. Because one day when that person finds you and they want to hear your crazy story about wasabi peanuts and birds or whatever it might be, whatever crazy combination you have, it really helps if you're as good as you can be when you tell that story. Or if you're medium, if you're doing it in a video or a podcast, or you're writing poetry, or however you're doing that, can be as good a vehicle as possible so that it carries the intention of your message in the best way. Yeah. So yeah, that's one way to see it.
I think that's great advice. I think that's wonderful advice. Love what you've shared with us, your personal story, your platform. Thank you for sharing this space, for sharing your story, for helping all of us become a bit more aware now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's a beautiful opportunity. Thank you. And I really love what you guys are doing too. It's a great cause, and yeah, you've got a story to tell, an important one too. So I'm glad you're telling it.
Thank you so much.